Hi, I'm Danielle Cezanne. I'm the gallery director at White Bear Center for the Arts, and I would like to introduce this artist panel from the show Disquietude in alphabetical order. Tonight we're having a discussion with Kino Evil leading it. The show was curated by Leslie Barlow. The next artist is Brice Cabarral. I don't think I said your name very well, and I really apologize for that. This is Taylin DeJeanette's work. She couldn't be here tonight. And then next we have Filippo Daiuli. Maya Lee Hartman. Sarah Nicole couldn't be with us tonight, but that's her artwork. And then we also have Jacqueline Nuzzo, who unfortunately wasn't part of the previous gallery talk that we had. So I hope she can say a few words tonight about her art. And our moderator is Kino Evil, who put together an anthology, Garden of Black Joy. It's a wonderful book. I hope you can order it because he has a talk coming up on the 8th of October. And he has some of the poets from around the world. So I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you so much. How's everyone doing? Thank you all for being in this digital space as we talk about the role of the artist and the role of our work in this moment of imagination and the role that the arts may serve in keeping the memory of this moment alive. And it seems like almost a sacred question to think about what's happening here, right? At a certain speed, what happened here? And it's just a joy to be in conversation with friends and to be introduced to each of your work. I really was truly inspired, and I'm sure I could like nerd out with each of you on, you know, the craft and the imagination that came into your work. And so hopefully we'll just be able to just, you know, briefly talk about what went into creating pieces in response to this sort of tender moment that's been just so intense. So thank you for having me here and entrusting me to curate this conversation. And thank you to Leslie for curating such amazing show. I appreciate being in conversation with you all. So to kind of start, right? One thing that sort of stood out to me in Leslie, your work was the sketches, the drawings, and particularly the sort of thrill line, right? Was I saw the word future in a few pieces, but particularly in the future wasn't completed yet, right? Bits of it was sketched out, but it was still sort of in process. And I guess to sort of start thinking about George Floyd, thinking about, you know, even yesterday, the recent injustice of, you know, not indicting the cops that killed Breonna Taylor. Just I would love to hear you think out loud about what does it mean to have the word future not completed yet, and just, you know, seeing the photograph and just your thoughts on that as it relates to us working towards a better future. Any sort of thoughts you may have on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that insight, Kino. I don't appreciate that I have to start first. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I think you really hit the nail on the head as far as what was being depicted. I've created a few pieces actually recently. I just did a cute little black print that also had the word future on it. I've been thinking a lot about what kind of power we have in manifesting the future that we want to see, and the artist's role in that process and that work. And so it made a lot of sense when I was trying to figure out what I was going to draw for those pieces, that that word would be in there. But the part where you mentioned that the artists are in process, that's a key part of both of those pieces, actually, and also something that I employ in a lot of my work. I like to leave parts of my paintings and drawings looking as if they are in the process of being made, so not complete, whether certain things aren't fully painted in, or and that's really to show that there's more to the story left to be told, that we have autonomy and power in shifting our story and growing, right? And having that not everything is solid. And so having that flexibility in the piece is important for me. It also allows, I feel like, the viewer to almost auto-complete the piece, right? So they're seeing the work and seeing, because it's my hand in the work. It's also the there's actual artists being depicted in the work, and then as the viewer, you are also implicated in finishing that piece as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I would love to hear some of the other artists respond as well. How about you, Jacqueline? I would love to get to know a little bit more about your work, and do these themes resonate, right? Themes of autonomy, themes of the work as it's shown in the gallery is still in process, right? And the audience also plays a role in that sort of completion. Do these things resonate with your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Like very similarly to Leslie, it's like very much like an ongoing sort of kind of piece within itself. But it's like a 3-series piece that's kind of this linear sort of narrative, but I had it in 3 pieces because I didn't want to confine the whole story just to one sort of boundary. You know, it's 3 pieces, it all kind of blends within each other, and it's kind of intended for, like, you know, the audience to also kind of like fill in the blanks, like what's going to happen before, what's happening in the background, what's happening outside of the physical paper spaces that we're seeing. And yeah, I use in my work a lot of, you know, physical and like figurative expression to really convey the sort of emotional state that we're all feeling. I'm very interested in body language and how we express whatever sort of internal emotions, you know, through our mannerisms and through our gestures. And that's why I included all those different figures kind of all over the place, out of control, just because that's how I was feeling. And I feel like a lot of people also in the community were feeling that at the same time as I was, because I made this in June, a few weeks after all of the protests going on around George Floyd's murder happened. So that's how I processed all of my internal sort of thoughts and questions and anger and confusion and frustration and just kind of violation, you know, like your people are coming into your space. So I kind of recreated that space in that work. But yeah, that's kind of how I'm, brief synopsis of my work, and yeah, how I feel about it.
Appreciate that. Absolutely, absolutely. And my one thing that sort of resonated with me with your work is this word ungovernability, right? To try to achieve a state of to achieve a state where we're ungovernable, right? And I would just love, but particularly around something you said around pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. And I would just love to hear you think out loud about, is there a connection between pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone into like a new medium or zone in this theme of ungovernability? And just your sort of thoughts on and why that word, why ungovernable in this particular George Floyd moment?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think will give you some good insight into like how all of my pieces tie in together, and also just to me responding to this really traumatic string of events. So the word ungovernable actually came to mind from there's this little booklet that one of my roommates had brought home, and it's called Inhabit Instructions for Autonomy, and it lists 10 different steps for achieving autonomy. Step one being like finding your community, then like building hubs, for example. Step four, which I also touch in on the piece that is the crystal ball, being share a future. And then the 10th step being become ungovernable, which essentially is finding autonomy, something that we don't even realize that we do not have and are like lacking severely. It's what seems to be like basic, what we would imagine to be like basic human rights that we just don't have, and our ability to decide what we do with our bodies, and our ability to move safely and equally, and having access to resources. And to me, that is becoming ungovernable is expressed in my work, yeah, like you said, through working in just a diverse range of mediums and working outside of the box of like what I've been told I'm allowed to do in art. And I can't count how many times as like a self-taught artist I've been told like, you really need to like find your niche and have your work be identifiable, based on the style. Like somebody should look at a piece of yours and be like, I know that belongs to Maya Lee. And I'm like, that idea of like being put in a box and not being able to explore outside of that, I really wanted to push myself to have every piece be something that is really challenging what it means to create art and to express yourself, and just kind of like, yeah, I wanted it to feel ungovernable. And I'm hoping that that's the read of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, I would love to hear the other artists' thoughts on continuing this theme of ability. Do you all break the rules that are typically imposed on your craft, whatever they may be, right? And really, I guess that question comes down to like, what are the ways you experiment, try innovative things, just to hear anyone sort of thoughts posed to the broader. What are the new sort of ways for being ungovernable, breaking the rules of our traditional sort of craft? Does anyone have any sort of thoughts on that?
You're breaking up a little bit.
Being spontaneous, sort of.
Oh yeah, being spontaneous. Got the last little part. Yeah. Well, I know one part of this show was thinking about the risk that artists take to push outside of their comfort zone. And that was something that just as a group we were talking about. And I would love to hear, I think for the most part, we all made new work for the show and kind of went outside of maybe the norm of what people would expect from us. So I know, Reese, you for sure had, your piece, technically it's wearable, but it's not maybe typical of what people would expect from you.
Yeah, so I took a little bit more of a avant-garde take, a little more like conceptual route that I normally take. Fashion design is usually like super commercial, so I wanted to elevate it so it's not just like passed by. It's something that people can look at and acknowledge and question like each element of the piece and what it stands for. So I feel like I definitely challenge myself through this show.
And one thing I appreciate about you, your work, is this idea of like abundant thinking. I love the quote, as long as there's beans at home, we're good. And I would love to just hear you speak a little bit about the role of abundant thinking, or just the role of why abundant thinking is sort of useful, or how that came into be with the clothing that you created.
So I chose like that quote, "Hay frijoles en la casa." It's like a saying in like Latinx cultures, or especially Mexican culture. It's something my mom has said. So for me, that piece, like the beans represent security, like in times of uncertainty. So when COVID hit and when we rescheduled this show and George Floyd happened, and all these incidents, I thought about like what is secure, like what can we know, like take note of what we do have, and like the strength in our foundations, because I think sometimes like with everything happening, we feel super out of control. So it's like, how can we reset and like reset ourselves and like think of like all the strengths we do have. So thinking abundantly, it's like you feel empowered, you're able to move forward versus being like paralyzed in times like these. So then I just thought about that, and like that's something my mom says, like as long as there's beans at the house, like you're okay. Like everything else is kind of like a luxury, or it's just like not always necessary. So thinking of like just the essentials, and like the red ribbon, like standing for like, you know, your family. And then the field, my dad's an agriculture worker, and I always like to acknowledge like manual labor, like blue collar workers, and something in this time that are essential workers. So acknowledging all of that in this piece, and then also the denim representing like manual labor workers. So it's just, yeah. I think another part is like, I think like essential workers, or people that are considered essential workers before COVID have just kind of been overlooked, and thinking of that today is like seeing how important like the mundane things that, or like the things that we overlook, and how essential that is. And it's like thinking of like that abundance, like of like most people are doing those types of jobs and those types of works, and look at how much, like how important that is in this time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would love to hear folks' thoughts on being tired. And do we do our art as artists in these moments when we're tired? Do we always create a new piece from an abundant place? Can abundant pieces be created when we're tired? Yeah, just any sort of thoughts on that. Did we create any of these pieces out of a sense of being tired, or were we always imaginative in the process? Filippo, I would love to sort of hear from you if you have any sort of thoughts or things you're thinking about in this moment.
Yeah, hope you all can hear me well. But I think something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, as a Black artist, you know, it's been weird to think about what kind of art I should be creating at this time, or if the kind of art I'm creating right now is overlooking what's happening around me, or if it's speaking about what's happening around me. And I don't know, this piece is, you know, specifically for this show, wasn't, it came out of definitely being tired and wanting something refreshing and something that describes the moment and kind of act as a time capsule, but not necessarily be so direct. So I talked with Leslie about the pieces that I wanted to include in here, about fear, about and mainly to give background about this, this is part of a series of painting that I've been working with that has to deal with water phobia within the Black community. And so you're kind of looking into, one page of a book with this painting, but definitely made it when I was tired. And I thought, to include the summer, I guess summer essence that's going on, that could kind of remind me to the struggles that we're dealing with right now if I look back to this, but also not, necessarily create a George Floyd portrait, or do, and nothing wrong with those at all, but I wanted to obviously do something that's different that will still remind me and my friends and family of what we're going through, specifically with this piece, including my brother and my sister. Kind of the first time actually we've all been together in a painting or in any kind of artwork. So I'm definitely looking more, I'm studying myself more and what's happening around me. And you can see, I mean, in the painting, it's kind of clear, like I have the most details on me versus my siblings. So it's very much a self-portrait, but also looking at what's happening near me.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And my siblings are all writers and poets. And so I resonate deeply with leaning into that as the kind, and not assuming that we have to produce art that sort of remembers or reflects the crisis. But, perhaps we could produce art that lets folks know what got us through the crisis, like our siblings.
I would love to speak to your question on abundance. Cool. Well, he mentioned, like, I think a really good question. Can you create art? Oh, there he is. Awesome. Can you create art from a place that's not abundance? Or like, what is it like to create when we are tired? And I haven't been asked that before, so thank you for that, because I've just been sitting here and then hearing you talk, Filippo, through like working on this piece, tired, right? And like I can definitely say that I'm exhausted, right? I have energy to make work, but I'm super exhausted by everything daily that we are being told about ourselves by this world, right? It's like, if it's not getting justice for Breonna Taylor, it's Trump saying that he's not going to give up power. It's a constant, you're navigating constantly, right? And it is difficult to take all that in and then go to the studio and try to bring life to something. The pieces that I made for this show were, the reason I chose drawing was because I was exhausted and I wanted them to be intimate. I wanted them to feel very of the moment, just like how the murals were. But there also was this element of like, creating right now is just weird. It's a wild experience to try to create when you're carrying that weight. So yeah, I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts about that. I don't really have like a conclusion, but just thinking about, how what we're going through impacts the kind of work we make or cannot make, But I do find a lot of joy in the work that I make, and that's why I come back to it.
Right.
I think that's really, really what it is that the process of making art is very healing. So if I do have that little bit of energy, I will divert it to the art for sure.
Right, totally. And that makes me think about two things. One, in A Garden of Black Joy, which you did the phenomenal cover of, there's this theme that joy isn't always joyful. That the activity of being joyous may not look like happiness all the time. It may just look like being with your people, maybe when you're sad, or when you're upset or frustrated at the state or the police, these happy moments. But what's there though is relation, like modes of relation. And yeah, in this idea of, you know, creatives and artists aren't machines. So it's not as if we need to produce a sort of at like a certain rate, right? And I love what you said around, you know, like, you know, sometimes it's hard to create, right? But then, you know, perhaps sometimes we have to let go of that expectation of like a certain expectation to produce at a certain rate, right? I would love to hear any other thoughts that you all may have on that as well.
Yeah, I would love to speak on that a little bit. I think for myself, I have such a hard time verbalizing what I'm experiencing, that like that's what painting and drawing has been for me, like my means of like releasing all of the things that I can't find the words to express. So it's like I'm tired and I am exhausted, and it feels like, how much more of this can we take? But if I'm like not able to get that out even in sketching or like some small sort of creating, then it's like it feels like that all builds up inside of me. So I feel like somehow it recharges me and like creates space for me to keep moving when I'm able to create a painting about what I'm going through, or create a drawing about my experiences. And I feel like additionally, I've been really blessed to be working with creatives after curfew and get to also kind of experience what it's like to tell our stories through painting collectively and with other Black artists and with members of my community that are going through the same thing. And like you were saying, just even us being around each other, like nobody really has to be talking. We just have music playing, and like that in and of itself is healing and recharging. And especially during the, like, can we talk about the fact that it is a pandemic and like we don't get to be around people anymore? I feel like that adds just like a whole other layer of what it means to be exhausted and like not have a release for that, of just like running into a friend and being able to like talk about like, yo, I'm tired. This is a lot. This is heavy. So I feel like that's kind of been my experience with this exhaustion.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts, experiences with being tired, and particularly in this, you know, digital world? How are we going towards community? Did we create these works in isolation by ourselves in our homes? Did we create them in community? How did those spaces maybe affect our process? You know, are Zoom calls helping us create art? Do we, you know, yeah, any other sort of thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I was not working, I was not part of the Studio for 100 program this past year, but I still felt so connected to everybody through things like Zoom and just talking online. And I've had, you know, Leslie, you were doing a few studio visits with all of us, and because I wasn't in the studio, we had a Zoom studio meeting. And I remember showing you my work, which I was just making by myself in my apartment, a terrible time to live alone during a pandemic in a studio apartment. But I remember I was like hanging up the drawings to you, like moving back away in the camera, being like, Leslie, what do you think? I have all these drawings. And it's, you know, it's been tricky, like giving and receiving feedback when you can't actually be there to, you know, feel the work, like feel the vibe, get like, you know, the aura in the space, but also see like the detail and the intricacies of the work, and you can't like feel the texture and everything. But by not having that sort of work tangible and physical in your space, it's you're able to have more of like, I don't know, like an emotional, conversational connection, because that's all you can really have at that time, given the circumstances. And so I feel like that's allowed me to, or helped me learn how to talk about it more and talk about my work and get behind the real like meat of what is driving my work rather than just focusing on the final product itself. So yeah, it's hard, but I mean, I think it's completely shifted my perspective as to how we go about, you know, learning and seeing each other's work and taking it all in visually, and how we go about engaging in conversation.
Absolutely. And that brings up for me, I would love to hear your thoughts on scale. And what scale are we working with our art? Are we producing small things, large things, and the intentionality behind scale? With just any thoughts on that and what we're trying to get folks to pay attention to in terms of sculptures. Just any thoughts that you all may have on the use of scale.
I guess I could speak on a little bit about this. I would say for me, it's been really interesting to experiment, especially with large scale work. I actually recently had to do, I had to work on a sketchbook, a small sketchbook for this project, and it was really tough for me to go back to that small scale and actually like have the details that I want, and for people to notice the things that I want, and when I work in such a large scale versus small scale. So I definitely, this painting, it's large, and I wanted to obviously explore the space that our bodies take up, and especially brown bodies. And I feel like any painting that I've made that's small and working with human figures, or it hasn't really created an impact compared to the large scale works. And especially when I'm talking about my own experience as a Black man on my canvas, I feel like whenever I blow it up in larger scales, it becomes more lifelike, or more real, I guess, and more, I don't want to say professional, but more noticeable, I guess. Yeah. So I've definitely enjoyed working in large scale, and I'm definitely going to stay in that lane for sure.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on the scales that we're working with and why we're choosing the scales that we're working with?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that a little bit. I feel like for me, I work in a variety of sizes. My work, when I entered the studio space, kind of being in the like 9x12 range, starting off small, just because that was my comfort zone. I think having the opportunity to work on murals in a large wall kind of like just launched me into the comfort of like, the kind of the idea of like taking up space and that becoming a little bit less intimidating. But I think I also approach the work that I make more so in terms of like, how am I going to draw my audience into like every inch of my work and kind of have all of that work together to like tell the narrative. So the piece that I have that says ungovernable, being really simple in terms of like design and what's happening, and the letters being really flat, but then the paper and the texture that holds kind of drawing your eye all the way from one end to the other, and that being about over 12 feet long, so definitely a larger piece. And then my other 3x3 foot paintings kind of speaking more so to the textures and the little symbols and how that draws your eye into the space.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on scale, the scales that we're working with?
I had a really fun time with this series because I had never worked this large before. They were 3 19 by 25-inch pieces of paper. So you all do the math and tell me how big that is, but it felt like it was a lot bigger than I've ever done. And it gave me so much space to really experiment. But also it required a lot of planning just because, I draw with pen on the paper, but then I layer it on top with transparent vellum. And so it kind of creates this sort of like colorful, like colored space on top of all the pen drawings. So, once you put that paper on, you can't really go back. I use glue, so there's no like erasing or anything. So I had to be very intentional with every mark that I make and every shape that I cut out. So it was kind of like this 2-in-1. Like I had so much room to play and experiment, but I also didn't have a lot of room to make like a mistake. Or if I did make something that was a mistake, I had to figure out a way to work with it that way. And then also it allowed me to create like 3 layers of depth within the piece. So there's kind of, one layer of these larger bodies, another layer of medium size behind it, and then a smaller layer. So there's a lot of like, physical depth, but then also you could say like emotional depth to it as well. So yeah, I got to experiment a lot with it, and it was a ton of fun.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then that, for me, that brings up this idea of speed. One of my favorite writers, Tony Bamba, not all speed is movement. And I'm interested to hear your all thoughts on the speed of these works. Did they happen quickly? Did they happen slowly? Did you leave them and then come back? Just any thoughts around speed, and the speed of the works that you're making right now, maybe. Was the response to this George Floyd moment quick, or was it like, I'm gonna take my time?
I think that's really interesting. Thinking about it in terms of like the way that we've seen people respond to George Floyd, it's like there's always kind of a sense of urgency in these times. And I feel like that is just like ingrained in the way that we've been taught to move as Americans, and like capitalism and like time is money and like just like let's get it done. So I think it's a really delicate balance of like getting things done while giving yourself the time to process what you're doing so it is being done intentionally. And obviously that's like a really, really tricky thing to navigate during a time like this and like with so much going on. Speaking for myself, like I could have had a year to make this show, and 2 weeks before the show I would have started my work. And it's just kind of the way it goes. But my process in terms of speed is kind of like, I feel like I have so many ideas that I'm wanting to bring to life that my process just kind of happens pretty quickly. So I think I spent maybe 2 months maximum on all 3 pieces. The image of the face is one that I did start back in February and return to it with like a completely different, just being in a different headspace and with a different design and process of approaching. But yeah, I think it's for me just like finding the balance of like being present and intentional while also getting my ideas out there to create space for new work.
Yeah, I can speak to my experience both as curating and then my own work in the show. So this show had a few different dates of opening, right? It kept getting pushed back because of the pandemic. And so for me, and I'm sure a lot of the artists this resonates with as well, we didn't really know when we should like begin making the work, right? And with our own shifting experiences in that time, whatever work we were going to be making was going to change, right? So it was, time is so interesting right now, thinking about delays in Zoom calls, thinking about how long it takes to get through our email inboxes nowadays. But yeah, things being delayed or pushed up or whatever it is, that just like time is so elusive right now. And so, yeah, with this show, as far as curating, I love the idea, like, yeah, not all speed is movement. I wrote that down. I love that. But thinking, yeah, like there was a lot of time for us to prepare for this show. And then all of a sudden we had a day that the show was opening and there was not that much time at all. You know, it really did, you know, move back and forth like that. For my own work, it's interesting thinking about drawings because a lot of folks think that they are quite fast. And I guess compared to my paintings, they are. But when you think about, like, you know, per inch, I think drawings are actually much slower, much more meditative. The process of like layering the graphite in those pieces and then erasing and then relayering, it is a slow, intentional process. And that is so different from what I'm actually depicting in the drawings, these large scale murals that were done in a 48-hour period, you know, like so fast. And so to kind of switch, like turn speed on its head and communicate something that did have a sense of urgency, like what Maya was talking about, did have this it's a very responsive act, right, in the moment action, and then try to translate that action into a small graphite drawing that honors the act of making and honors this action of preserving or remembering it. Yeah, the concept of time shifts in that. So yeah, I love thinking about it in terms of time, and that's a really cool way of thinking about it. And there definitely was a slow and fast part of the work that I included.
Okay, cool. Yeah, one thing that I'm thinking about are memories, and the role of memory in the pieces that you all created for the show, and in general in your art right now too. Actually, are we creating work that that is about certain memories right now, in this moment, or are we creating work that is more future after this moment, you know? And then just thinking about what's just exciting for us right now, you know, in our art. You know, are we more so interested in, I want to document or archive just, you know, what I'm feeling in this moment, or is it more of a futuristic orientation? And just what we're having more fun with, or what we're sort of feeling more therapeutic in. Any sort of thoughts on memory or future, where we're at, or the present? You know?
Go for it. Yeah, I feel like my work is really centered around kind of like capturing the emotions of where I'm at in the moment of creating that specific work, and like the release of like all the things that I've been holding. So for me, that is kind of like a time capsule to like look back on when it is the future, and I'm like, okay, things aren't as like heavy as I was feeling then, but I can still remember like, wow, that was like a really intense time, or like, wow, that was like a moment of like extreme joy, and that's something I can hold on to when I'm like in a bad place. And I think that that's like what I really focused on specifically with the painting of the figure. It's like I do feel things very intense, and like just really capturing that and like remembering like whatever you're feeling right now is something that you will move through, because I think it can be easy to forget that, like with the weight of it all. And yeah, so I hope that that's something that like I'm able to look back on this work 10 years from now, or however far into the future, and kind of like just remember how truly heavy it was, and how amazing it is that like we're all moving through it, and to even look at it right now and be like, this is something that we are all working through and moving through and still finding our little pockets of joy somehow. And that's something really beautiful. So just kind of speaking to that.
Absolutely appreciate that. Any other thoughts on where our work falls in terms of time, memory, future, what feels more um, like a place of relief, I guess, or what just feels more doable right now in this moment?
Yeah, I could speak on that a little bit. I was gonna say Maya's input about capturing her emotions was really important because I feel like I'm sure a lot of us do that too. But I usually try to use the colors in my painting as a way, I guess, as a tool and as a way to uh, gauge my emotions. And usually before, I start with the idea, before even, the sketching, when I'm forming my idea or researching, I'll probably have like a certain uh, a certain threshold that I want to hit with how I'm feeling about this painting or where it's going to go. And usually before it's done, I can tell that this is not where I want to be. And when it's done, I kind of preserve that feeling, if it's relaxation, or if it's, to remind me of a time when I was younger, or if it's to just look at, because it's pretty, just preserving that moment and then going back to it later on and thinking about obviously all the memories that went into creating that piece, whether or not you were rushed or you took your time, and just really thinking about, the past and how I felt when I was creating that piece and how the colors specifically made me feel at that time. And it's for me, it's kind of cool to like have that be my own personal keepsake, so to speak. No one can kind of experience the same thing with that painting. So
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah. Any other thoughts on time and memory future?
Yeah. I love this question because I'm thinking about my process and how it's all very like human bodies, figurative, and I often use photos that I've taken of like friends and family on my phone, and I use those as reference imagery for how I want, certain bodies to look or like certain poses to be made. And I'm kind of like picking, individual snippets of my past and old memories to create a new sort of narrative that's usually about the present. It's very much like reactive to something that is currently happening or something that happened, within a short amount of time. So, and then I think about, how do I look to the future with all of this? I don't know. I think maybe I don't look to the future that often in my work, which is really interesting. But it's all about, creating a narrative and creating a moment just based on, my past memories and, just thoughts that I've had, and trying to recreate it in my own way, recreate the present in my own way.
I want to let you know that there are some questions now that it's turned on. A few questions have come in. If you wanted to answer those, can you see them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a bunch. Awesome.
Wow.
They're flooding in. I can answer real quick the one that's in the Q&A. Because it actually ties into your question, Kino. Thinking about present, past, future, what is the art evoking or talking about or connecting with? And I think for me, Cece, your question actually plays into mine a little bit. I do think about audience when I'm creating my work, but the audience is a younger version of myself. And so I'm often thinking about the kinds of images that I didn't get to see, whether it's in pop culture, museums, you name it, and what I really would have connected with. So there is this kind of travel to the past, but then depicted in the work is very much based in the present. I paint a lot of actual real people, regular ass folks, just like in my community. Or Jacqueline, like you said, like using photos on your phone as inspiration. So that's the present. And then also thinking about what kinds of futures can be achieved by having this kind of representation. So yeah, but I often think too, like as a little kid, like, yeah, what kind of, or maybe not specifically me, but like a young Black child, what images would they have wanted to see reflected back to them?
I think,
Yeah.
I think for me, it's really been fun to kind of have like two different practices, like my mural practice and then my studio practice, as a means of like exploring all sides of creating and thinking about like my audiences in two different ways. My studio practice being more centered around like sharing my experience and painting like my narrative and feelings and like my personal friends, family, photos like that. And then the public art that I've been a part of being a way of painting stories of our communities and stories that reflect our communities. So just feeling really blessed that I get to like kind of explore it all.
Absolutely. Any other sort of thoughts? Any other sort of thoughts? Do we want to respond to a few more questions in the Q&A that we find interesting?
Chat about the peers and family. Do they influence you as you're doing your work?
I could say a little something about that. I was thinking about more recently about the people around me and how they critique my work. Obviously, like my partner and my son and my close family members are gonna love most of it, most of the work that I'm gonna do. But again, I think, for an example, this specific piece that I made in my apartment, and it was very isolated. And after I got it done, I took it to the studio, and I think Maya, Sarah, and Reese were there, and they kind of just started to give me a little critique and look at it and give me all the things, and it was very refreshing and very eye-opening, because sometimes I would think about maybe the advice that the critique that comes from my partner is a little bit too biased, or maybe it's maybe it's definitely too biased, and maybe she's been living with me for too long, and I take it with a grain of salt, so to speak. So yeah.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on how family and friends come into our work, particularly the conversations we have with them, or the ideas, or any other sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to speak a little bit on that. I think this piece in particular has really, like, at least from like strangers or people from the outside, has given a chance for people to know me a little bit more, and like what my background is and who I come from. And then this piece is definitely influenced by like my upbringing of growing up on a farm with immigrant parents on a migrant farm. So I think that's definitely had an impact, and this piece honors them, even though that I feel like they won't really see it or maybe not understand it as much. But I hope that people that do look at this stuff can receive like new information on the background from this piece, like the problems in agriculture and in fashion and current events, how it all ties together. So yeah, I definitely feel like people know me a little bit more through this piece, and the response has been great, and I really appreciate everyone's thoughts on it and encouragement.
Absolutely. And one thing that I was wondering about your all's pieces is the use of colors and saturation. and I'm thinking you all have around being drawn to, particularly again, given everything that's going on, brightness or different, kinds of colors or color choices, or just what might be your all thinking around shades, the shades that we chose, or is there any sort of thoughts around, for this piece, I want it to be bright to have a certain experience with the audience, or this piece a little bit more. Just any thoughts around brightness, color, shade, and the choices we made with that.
I'd like to answer that question just because I feel like my color choice was, it seems like it fit just so well with the theme, but also it wasn't intentional. So my piece is called Blue Body Transparency. And as I had said before, I layer my pen drawings with transparent colored paper. And I found that all of the colors I had were very clear and translucent. The only one that was a little fuzzy was the dark blue. And that was also the time while the George Floyd protests were happening, people were doubting and questioning and criticizing the police, also known as, blue bodies, blue. And I'm like, oh, that's fitting. Lack of transparency, lack of clarity, lack of trust. I'm like, this is really coincidental. So I just ended up using that color as well. It was kind of like a happy little accident. But I thought that was a learning lesson for me as to how you could use the medium to be really intentional and really emphasizing like the story and the messaging, and also how you're processing this really confusing time. So I thought that was kind of the whole point of the piece, was to kind of explain that as well. And it was just so reflective and so representative of the times too, and what me and a lot of my friends and family were thinking as well.
I was just going to say, are there any last thoughts, anything that you'd like to say? And then I could just wrap it up and thank our sponsors.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm so grateful to just be and to be here and to share space with you all, and to hang out and talk about these wonderful pieces. So it's just been a thrill, and thank you for inviting me into this space.
Wow. Thank you for being here. I'm just so sorry that we didn't have a live opening with wine and music, and really you've just created a world in the gallery it's just wonderful. It's so moving and deep.
Hey Danielle, real quick, I think Brees had one last thing that she wanted to share.
I just looked it looks like one question was asked in both spaces, so I just didn't want to skip over any practices that you have that help protect the emotional space to create your work. I don't want to skip over whoever had something.
It's a really good question.
Anyone wants to answer that?
I think speaking personally to that, my work is really heavily influenced by emotion and the emotions that I'm experiencing. So my way of protecting that is making sure that, like, when I'm sitting down with a painting or a piece of work, that I am in an emotional space to like be connected with that. So it is, whatever I'm creating is like coming out in the way that I'm intending for it to, and that my audience is going to be able to experience that when they're viewing the piece.
Well, thank you everybody for watching, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for your interest in having us show in the space. The space is beautiful. We really got to create the kind of show that we wanted. It's such a great space. You were so helpful in the whole process. And I also just wanted to shout out, all the artists in the show, including Sarah and Taylin, who couldn't be here tonight. It was so incredible working with you all. This is only my second show that I've curated, and I feel like it was just a beautiful collaborative process. I loved getting to know more about your work and your processes as well. So thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, I wanted to mention, again, Garden of Black Joy, that will be October 8th at 7 o'clock. We also, October 1st at 7 o'clock, we have, we're going to release a video with Peyton Russell, and he's going to talk about graffiti, the history of graffiti, and he painted one of the iconic George Floyd murals, and he has just a really interesting insight in just the history, taking it back to the hieroglyphics of man's need to do art. So you can also view the full Disquietude show online, including booklets where you can look more closely at the art, and also see the original artist talk when we were installing the show. So please register for the Garden of Black Joy, and we'll make sure we have the questions going right away, so they'll be answered. And I'd like to thank our premier sponsors. Our platinum sponsors are Emergency Contractor Services Incorporated, New Studio Architecture, Riel Precision Manufacturing Corporation, Schweeder's Building Supply Construction Incorporated, and Schweeder's Pottery. Our gold sponsors are Boehm and Berenshire, Mueller Memorial, Steve Goranson Video, and the Pillars of White Bear Lake. I would also like to thank the Manitou Foundation for their support, and the state of Minnesota. This activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a Minnesota State Arts Board Operating Support Grant, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. And thanks, White Bear Center for the Arts.
Thank you, Kino.
Thank you, Kino.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. This poem is titled The Birds. Once I saw a black boy holding a bird. Transit stations don't pet people as well as they spill them. He spilled his fingers, as if pouring a bit of himself where there wasn't any life onto the body gently as to not break feathers stroke its spine. The beak blossomed from his backpack, greeted me unafraid of my giant black frame. I fell in love with this detail of the day. By the way his spine bent, the bird and the boy have not had many memories of hands doing this to their bodies, being gentle. The bird's eyes drunk my body as if he knew what it meant to be feared by creatures smaller than him. Drug use happens when communities don't have small birds. There aren't enough birds where I live. The boy became a father, dropping seeds into the mouth of a child. There aren't enough children where I live. Not ones with homes like the black boy and his backpack. Black men flock for buses like seeds. There aren't enough buses where I live. The bird is now holding the black boy. Feathers stressed out and beaten, beak bruised and breath drunk. Very gently before flight, cradling black boy in arms, says to me, "You got a cigarette? You got something that will set me on fire?"